My local priest sexually assaulted and raped me several times. It started by going to his office and him wanting me to masturbate him and to perform oral sex on him. And it ended with vaginal penetration and multiple rapes for the next several months. I initially had met him at I believe it was a youth convention that the diocese put together for all the local parishes, but it was just a very brief exchange. I had saw him briefly, and then I spoke to him more so later in that week after school. I had late practices, so I was there after school as well, and he came out of his house, kitty corner from the church, and asked if he could look at the book that I was reading, and that was our first real introduction and my first experience of violence with him. He asked me to go in to meet with him briefly to get a book, and asked that I was seated on one of his love seats in the office. So I took a seat, and then he went over to a bookshelf and started looking through books, and I heard the sound of a zipper, but I was immediately embarrassed. I was embarrassed for him. I thought he had accidentally forgot his zipper down or something, and I just remember thinking how embarrassing, I'm just not going to make eye contact, and just looked away. And my attention was brought back to him, and he was already starting to undress himself and touch himself at that point, and was asking me to do the same thing. And I remember saying no, and that this was a sin, and that just being very confused. And I remember the priest collar coming off and being set on the side table next to the love seat that I was sitting on. And I had experienced sexual violence before in my life, so at that point, I think I was in shock, but I knew his intentions were not good. And then he proceeded to force me to have oral sex with him and intercourse at that point. And I just remember I ended up laying on the floor, and I just remember him telling me get yourself together, you gotta go, and just scrambling in shock, and just the smell of and the feeling of his sweat on my body, and just I couldn't get out of there fast enough, but I couldn't move. It was the weirdest combination. It's very hard to explain. And then just running to the school and getting in trouble because I was late and somebody had to do my lines, and but just the utter shock. It was I instantly lost my voice. I was instantly silent. I think I was so afraid of him. It's clearly no wasn't enough, and like I said, this man was making threats against my life. All I knew is that he was fully capable of following through with it. He was already seriously injuring me. I had no other evidence to suggest otherwise, to suggest that he wouldn't hurt me or that he wouldn't go after one of my family members. I think when I spoke initially, my main concern was to make it stop in some way, and I was nervous that he was going to come back to hurt me and to hurt other people. I remember feeling really just like a pile after like the first time I spoke. You know, it was for a purpose and a good purpose, but I was a child, and it was an unbelievable weight to have. And even after I told, you know, there is a sense of relief that the proper authorities know that you did your part, but then it's there, it's real. Like, it's more real than before almost, once people start knowing about it. So it was very hard as a child to try to understand all of those feelings and process everything that was going on. I still actually register for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and am still on medication to this day for it. But there has been a significant shift in what my PTSD looks like and how controllable that is symptomatically. You know, there was a point in that where I would lose touch with reality for hours on end and have body flashbacks, and would just completely lose myself and think that I was constantly back there. I think it's hard for me to speak with an absolute certainty on why the diocese, why a bishop, why the Pope, why anybody within that institution would be so forgiving to an individual that rapes children. I can't personally comprehend how that's even a possibility, let alone offering, you know, promotions or moving them around or whatnot. It, in my mind, is such a solid brotherhood, and it's beyond protecting the rapist. It's protecting the institution.